Hi, good night. This is U.S. Immigration Attorney Sharifa Tharpe. I am here live to take your U.S. immigration related questions. And I have a good topic to talk to you about tonight. I am going to talk about give you some quick and dirty tips to be able to submit your permanent residence marriage-based permanent residence. I'm also going to be signing on to TikTok tonight because I didn't get to make my appearance at 9 p.m. So I'm going to be doing both of them at the same time. Thanks so much for the love. I appreciate it. So let us go ahead and we're going to talk about the marriage-based permanent residence and the kinds of evidence that you should be looking at submitting. Because, what I do find is that one major mistake with this process is that you submit evidence thinking it's good and it may not be great evidence. And then what happens is that you get a surprise at the interview where the officer then starts to ask for even more evidence because they're not convinced by the evidence that you have already submitted. And so I'm going to talk about some of this evidence that you may think is great evidence that may need a little more work. So the topic here is not necessarily the evidence itself, but how you present the evidence that may create a problem during your marriage-based process. And so it's very, very, very important to be thoughtful and strategic about your evidence. Hello, good night on TikTok. I'm on both TikTok and Instagram, so you're going to be seeing my eyes bounce back and forth. That's why I'm going to be taking questions here. So before I jump into the topic, let me remind you that I'm also here to answer your immigration questions. So go ahead and put your questions in the comments so that I may answer your questions, and it can be anything that's immigration related. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about and giving tips about the types of evidence that makes good evidence when you're applying for the marriage base, because not all evidence is going to be great and you have to be very strategic and thoughtful about how you submit that evidence. Now, how long does it take to bring my husband here? So you could expect about 1.5 to 2 year process right now. All right, so I just released a video on Instagram, so go ahead, follow me on Instagram, and on that Instagram page I talked about, and on Instagram, I'm the immigration attorney. And so the video is that last video in my feed. And the video listed certain evidence as not so great evidence. And it is, on first thought, you probably think, how come, right? Because it's the marriage certificate, it's a joint bank account statement, it is pictures, right? And some of this evidence may not be great evidence if you're presenting it in a certain way. So mistake one that I see is some people submit an application with the marriage certificate, and that's it. And they think, okay, when I go to the interview, that's where I'm going to carry all my evidence to show the marriage is real. Big mistake, because once you've submitted a lack of evidence with only your marriage certificate, that's going to set the tone for your application. So before you even go into that interview, the officer knows how they're going to deal with you, and they already know that they now think that your marriage is real, and you're going to have to spend that interview trying to prove, they now think your marriage is not real. And you have to go into that interview. It's going to be a tough interview, and you're going to have to spend most of the time trying to convince them that your marriage is real. And you may not have brought the right evidence with you, which makes it worse. So this is why I'm telling you from now that the most important part of the marriage-based process is to submit good evidence, thorough evidence, thoughtful evidence from the beginning. And that does not necessarily mean your marriage certificate. What your marriage certificate is proving is that your marriage is legal. But the question is, it may be legal, but is it real? Because any two people can get married, right? Especially when you're dealing with immigration. They know that any two people would be willing to get married, get the marriage certificate, and apply for the permanent residence. So while the marriage certificate is required to show that your marriage is legal, it is not evidence to show that it is real. Those are two separate requirements in this immigration process. Thanks so much for the love on both sides. I appreciate it. So I see some questions here, and I'm going to take pause to answer. So how soon after I send the I-130 can I apply for the I-485? It really depends. So do you qualify to apply for adjustment of status? So if you qualify to apply for adjustment of status, you're going to have to get your receipt notice and then submit your application, your receipt notice with the I-485. Now, Shulina, remember that this is general information. I don't know if you qualify. I don't know how you're applying. So that is where a personal consultation is going to be very, very important. The Browers, it's nice to see you too. Now, wait a minute. For those of you who are here in the U.S., I also want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. I hope that you are going to have a good night with your family or people that mean a lot to you. I thought this topic would have been good because I'm also keeping in mind those who can't be with their spouses or their significant others because of the immigration process. And so you may be in a situation right now where you're separated, and you may even be feeling a little loneliness because of that. I have been through it. I know what that feels like. And so I am here to just give you some information to fill the time, and that could be helpful for you in the future to be able to be unified with your spouse or your significant other. Thanks so much. Thanks, PRGT. Happy Thanksgiving to you too. BJ Pumpkin, happy Thanksgiving to you too. I appreciate that. And thank you, Amanda. Happy Thanksgiving. So Bad and Bougie, love the name. I'm married, but it's not on my passport. So that's okay because, so many things happen between the time you issued your passport and as time goes by. So you're not, that's not going to go against you when you're proving whether your marriage is real or not. So let's see. So how long after a request for evidence DNA testing do you get the results? So it really depends on if you're submitting this to the embassy. It really depends on what their process is right now. So it could be a few weeks, even months, just because I'm seeing months just because they're backlogged right now. So I would say about 3 months is what I've seen for responses to requests for evidence. But check on your case and keep in mind that it's just estimates based on my experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case with you. So let's see. Do we have to file taxes together? So unapologetic, no. So not necessarily. Filing taxes together, that's a great idea, and it's a great way to show that your marriage is real. But is it a good tax strategy for you? There may be situations where your spouse, for example, you and your spouse may be more at an advantage by filing by yourselves. In that case, you have to make sure you get tax advice, especially make sure you fully understand the tax consequences of filing separately versus together. But in the immigration context, filing jointly, married filing jointly, is always going to look great on your and it can always be used as great evidence that your marriage is real. Green card, and what is the process? Min 45, I could spend all day on that process. So tonight I'm talking about proving what kinds of good evidence can you use to prove that your marriage is real. So what I can tell you generally is that you can get a permanent residence through an employer, through family, certain family members, even through humanitarian means. And if you're in a country that qualifies for the diversity visa, that is the diversity, that is like the green card for the lottery for the green card. So also, if my spouse doesn't have any status here, can I still get Medicaid in MD? So unapologetic, if you're, no, you should always check with your state, because state law differs, is different from state to state. But usually they don't, as long as you are a U.S. citizen, they're not necessarily going to restrict you getting Medicaid. You as an independent individual should be able to qualify as long as you meet the other requirements. Flossie, it's nice to see you. Happy Thanksgiving. All right, so let's see here on Instagram. What are the questions? Is it still on for November 28 or 29 for ICE situation, meaning they are more going to... Yes, so that is still on. Nothing has changed. If a person allowed to travel if they haven't overstayed but has a green card application pending. So you should, if you're talking about traveling outside of the United States, better off without you should have a travel document. And you should get legal advice about whether it's a good idea for you in particular to travel, just because circumstances are different, and advice as to whether you should travel or not is going to depend on your particular circumstances. But a travel document should be required. If you leave the country and you have a green card application pending, then you could, and especially when you have an adjustment of status. When you have an adjustment of status application, you're not supposed to be moving back and forth until you get a travel document. Because remember, better off without you. Remember this, right? When you have a visa, you're saying every time you go in and out of the country that you are staying temporarily. But when you have an adjustment of status application pending, even if you have a valid visa and you leave the country, they may not let you back in. They may tell you have to stay outside of the country, because now they know that you have permanent intent. So you could get into a lot of trouble there. That's where it's very important to get a travel document. So let's see here. Thanks so much for all of these questions. So do I have to use my marriage name when applying for a non-immigrant visa? I am, but it's not on my... So no, having your married name is not even necessarily required. So you don't, while it can be helpful, anybody can change their names as well. So it is not a major deciding factor when it comes on to that. Hi there, Natasha. It's nice to see you. Happy Thanksgiving. My status says case is being actively reviewed. Are they going to approve? No, it just means that they're looking at your case right now. But the BRARS 06, it doesn't mean that they are going to approve it. It's not an indication of the decision. Will it still take 10 years to sponsor my sister and her children here? Yes, and you want to make sure you get legal advice, because when she is here, it's going to be a completely different process. Because if she overstays and she and her children overstay, then it's gonna be she has to qualify for a waiver, as the law is right now. So you want to make sure that you get legal advice. How long does it take to bring a brother from Greece? Is there a website that lists time frame per country? So it's gonna take about 14 years right now. Now there is the National Visa Bulletin that can give you information about what dates they're processing, and you can determine the processing time based on the date that they're currently processing. All right, so let's see. Would you recommend an undocumented person going to a courthouse to file for divorce from a U.S. spouse without a family lawyer, or is major risk one shouldn't take, separated for a year? So his one and only, that's very specific. I can't give you personal legal advice about whether you should take that risk or not, because I don't know your circumstances. I don't know if you face a higher risk of being detained, or if ICE is actively looking for you. If that's the situation, you definitely have to be cautious and definitely get legal advice. Get legal advice regardless. But what I can tell you generally is that the courthouse is usually one of those places. I know during the Trump administration, there were nightmare stories about ICE going and picking up people in courthouses. And yes, that was happening. But right now they have changed their policies and they're not sending ICE to go into court unless of course you're wanted or you're high on their priority list. Usually you have to be a threat to national security or public safety for them to be actively looking for you like that, and even going into a courthouse. But generally speaking, individuals undocumented, despite their immigration status, can go and get a divorce and go and do things like this within a court that's unrelated to immigration. But get legal advice, make sure you are on the right track. Thanks, Flossie. You have a good Thanksgiving too. All right. So how can she come here first? So Dada, get legal advice, because you're getting very specific. She usually, when it comes down to the sibling of a U.S. citizen, she's not going to qualify for adjustment of status just because it takes so long. And so it's unlikely that she will be able to come here first and apply for the permanent residence while being here. She has to qualify through someone else if you're looking at a quick way to do this. The siblings of U.S. citizens, it's taking 14 years. So not even 10 years, 14 years. And so that for her adjustment of status to work, she would have to be here, and she would have to be maintaining status for the entire time that she's here. So it is best you get legal advice. You can always call, schedule a consultation, and I can provide you the advice you need. All right. So, okay, Flossie, I'm glad to hear this, and I am definitely looking forward to speaking with you soon. All right. So keep those questions coming, and I am talking. So I'm talking about a great topic tonight. So I just released a video on Instagram. So those of you on TikTok, if you don't follow me here, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, and you'll be able to see that video. It's the last video in my feed, and I listed some of the evidence that may not necessarily prove that your marriage is real. So I listed the marriage certificate. The marriage certificate is required to show that your marriage is legal, that you're legally married, but it is not the type of evidence that you would show that it is bona fide, because any two people can go and get married, but doesn't necessarily mean your marriage is real. So you first, when you're applying for permanent residence through marriage, you do have to show that your marriage is was legal wherever you got married. And that's where you show the marriage certificate. But then they want to see more evidence to show that the two of you enter the marriage in good faith, it's bona fide, and you plan to spend your lives together. And so the next thing I listed was a joint bank account with no money in there. That's a red flag for the officer that's reviewing. I've seen a pattern where people come to me in consultations, and they usually where they're about to be denied, and they say, well, I showed a bank account, a statement, and a joint bank account with both spouses. But that doesn't say much, because remember, any two people can go and create a bank account. But what's telling to the officer is, are there transactions in that bank account that's showing that you're commingling your funds, that you are together making financial decisions? And so if they see one little transaction, I've even seen situations where they've only submitted the first page of their bank statement. In that case, the officer is really asking what you have to hide, that you're not showing the entire bank statement. So a joint bank statement with just the front page or just very few transactions in the account can even go against you, because the officer can even use that as evidence to show that it is not real, that they're not convinced that your marriage is real. So it's very important to show a detailed bank statements, as many bank statements as you can. Show that you pay bills, show that you're trying to save money together, show that the both of you have access to that bank account and the money that is being deposited in that bank account. And then the last is pictures. So I've seen applications where they've gotten a notice of intent to deny because they have submitted just pictures and a marriage certificate. Pictures alone is not enough. The officers know very well that two people can get dressed up throughout the day and take pictures all over the place. So that's not very telling. When you are putting your pictures together, you should put pictures together at different times, different locations, different seasons, different holidays, different people, different family members. That can definitely tell the story of the marriage, but pictures alone still isn't going to cut it. I often say, to get through a successful marriage-based process, you have to be thoughtful about the evidence and show evidence that tells the complete story, not just chopped up pieces of your courtship and your marriage, but tells the complete story from the beginning to the end. And so that's not just pictures, right? Pictures is helpful, but you want to show other things. So at the start, were you on the phone all the time? Phone records could show how the both of you corresponded. WhatsApp, social media postings together. And then when you got married, and then affidavits from friends and family talking about what they knew about your relationship, how they observed the both of you together. And then the story of your marriage. How did you come together? Where did you live? What kinds of events did you celebrate together? How are you making decisions together? These are going to be very important, and you have to find the evidence to tell this story. And so that's the meaning of the video, is that it's not necessarily just throwing evidence at the officer, but presenting thoughtful evidence, thoughtful and strategic evidence, detailed evidence, because the officer, if you're just submitting very surface evidence, like the front page of a bank statement, that is going to make the officer ask more questions, and they're not going to start asking those questions until you get to the interview. And that's where, when you set the tone for this application by submitting a lack of evidence, or you don't put much thought into the evidence, then you get to the interview, and then the officer takes an approach of not just trying to ask questions to learn about your marriage, but rather trying to prove to themselves that this marriage isn't real. And that's where they start to get tough. They start to ask tough questions. They start to separate you, and sometimes they even get hostile. They get very tough with you. And so that when you go into an interview with that attitude, you start to mess up. You and your spouse may have gone in very prepared, and then you may get flustered. You may not answer questions correctly. So it's very important to set the tone for your interview by submitting thoughtful, detailed evidence from the start, so that the officer can see a full picture of your marriage, your relationship, and the officer can feel more at ease about their decision, and it can be a smoother interview because of that. All right. So what if you don't have a bank account together? So great question, Alicia. Bank accounts a joint bank account isn't necessarily required. This is with the marriage-based process, there is not There is not just a 1, 2, 3, 4 list of required evidence, right? It really depends on your particular circumstances, and that's where that's where the thoughtfulness comes in. Because you may be early on in your marriage, you may be two very young people who decided to go and get married, and you may not have a bank account together. You may not even be making enough money to create a bank account together. And so you have to look at other evidence to show that your marriage is real. But so a joint bank account isn't required, but I use it as an example of how good evidence can turn bad if you present it in a way that's not very thoughtful. And so if you're going to submit a joint bank account, you want to make sure that you put thoughts into it and you present it in a detailed way. And that applies to all the evidence, that you have to present it in a detailed way to paint the picture. What I need all that evidence if a child is involved? Would I need all that evidence if a child is involved, certified blessed? That is very specific. Now, showing evidence, as much evidence as you can never hurt. A child is very good evidence, very, very good evidence. Can't get better than that. But you don't want to underestimate this process either. And that's where it's very important to get legal representation, legal advice through your process. Don't underestimate your process. Don't take it for granted that you have a child together, so everything is going to be okay. You still want to tell that story about your marriage. You still want to paint that picture, that full picture of your marriage and your relationship. But once again, the types of evidence, the amount of evidence, the way you present the evidence is going to depend on your particular circumstances. So what if the house mortgage is only in your spouse's name? So BJ Pumpin, this is where the personal consultation is going to come in, right? Because it's not just, so the house is in your spouse's name. What other evidence do you have? That's the question. And how can you be thoughtful about that evidence? It is what evidence do you have, not what evidence don't you have. You have to look at what evidence you have that can paint a clear picture that your marriage is real. So how soon after marriage can you start filing for your spouse? So you can file right away. Generally, you can file right away. There are situations where timing could, the timing, not necessarily the timing of your marriage, but the timing of your filing can differ based on what your circumstances are. But you filing your application after, there's no specific time under the immigration law to file your application. For example, you don't have to wait a year after filing. But for example, with my clients, I evaluate what their marriage looks like. And from a strategic point of view, does it make sense to file right now, or do we need to give it a little more time before they file? Because the spouse may have been here a week, and in a case like that, is it a good idea to file the application right away? Because that could put the spouse in hot water in regards to misrepresentation. Or, if they've been together for a long time and the spouse has already overstayed their visa here in the U.S. for a very long time and they qualify for adjustment of status, in that case, they have a lot of history. In that case, there really is no reason to wait. So it really depends on your particular circumstances. Now, keep in mind that the information that I'm giving you here tonight is general information and it is not personal legal advice. So I may have listed evidence as examples. It does not mean that you must have that evidence. It just is an example, and really the evidence that you're going to present is going to depend on your particular circumstances, and that is where a legal consultation is going to be very important. to determine whether you qualify, how are you going to qualify, what are your options, and how can you present the best application possible. For me, I have seen my partner for a few years, so I have no photo of him, only the ones we sent each other. Okay, so Alicia, and it really comes down to your circumstances again, specific. So evidence in regards to your particular situation is going to vary, and it's going to depend. If you need personal legal advice about your particular evidence, your particular process, definitely schedule a consultation, and you can do that right now. There's a scheduling coordinator who is available and ready to take your call tonight. And the scheduling coordinators will be available to schedule your consultations even through the holidays. So through Thursday and Friday, they are still available, and the phone lines are still open to take your call and schedule the consultations for you, so that we can get into the nitty-gritty of your situation and be able to discuss the best way that you can apply and the best way that you can submit a successful application. All right. So I don't see any more questions here. And these were all great questions. I hope I gave you some useful information. So I see one here, phenomenal female. Is the evidence the same when one partner lives outside the US? Great question. So it can differ, right? It can be a little different. For example, where the spouse is filing for adjustment of status, there's the expectation that you're living together. I mean, there are certain situations where the spouses don't live together because of maybe school or a job. And of course, you have to make sure you shore up the evidence to show that it's a real marriage, and shore up the evidence to show why you had to live apart, because of school or work. But when it comes on to having a spouse outside of the United States, that expectation to live together and having joint property is not there or is not an expectation as much as it is if you're going through adjustment of status. That means that you and your spouse are both in the United States. I didn't have my married name in my passport. Do I have to use it on the non-immigrant visa when I apply? So Bad and Bougie, what's your legal name? It's not required to have your married name, but if you are now using your married name as your legal name, then that's the name that's going to be on your visa. All right. So thanks so much, everyone, for asking such great questions and for listening, and thanks for the love. I am going to be back here tomorrow at the same time. So on TikTok, I'm usually here at 9 o'clock, around 9 p.m. Eastern time. And on Instagram, I am here at 9:30, around 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we're going to stay with that time. I'm going to come with a topic. You should come with your questions. Those on Instagram, just know that I release videos, very informative videos on Instagram. Most of my content is on Instagram. I come on live on TikTok, but I release content on Instagram. So you can follow me on The Immigration Attorney. So let's see. So do you recommend changing my name? So it's really up to you. I did talk about this in a video in the past because, for example, I have had my clients, so many of my clients keep their names. They didn't change their names and everything was successful because it's not necessarily the name. So it goes right back to the evidence that anybody can change their name, right? To get a green card. So it doesn't really say much. What says a lot more is the evidence. So the evidence, right? And so while, it looks good when the both of you have the same name, but it's not a deciding factor. It is your choice. Do you want to keep your maiden name, or do you want to have your married name? That's your personal choice. And so it could go either way. But what you need to focus on is the evidence. That's going to be important. Evidence to show that the both of you are married, you're living in a genuine, meaningful type of marriage. That's going to be important here. All right. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining again. I really appreciate all your questions. I'm going to be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. on TikTok and 9:30 p.m. Eastern on Instagram. We are still taking appointments, so even though we won't have any consultations for the rest of the week, we are still taking calls and scheduling consultations. As a matter of fact, the scheduling coordinators are available up from between 9:30 a.m. and 11 p.m. Tomorrow and Friday. So you can go ahead, call and schedule your consultation, and then we can talk about your particular circumstances. I saw so many people asking on here about their particular evidence. That is where the consultation is going to be very, very important. Because remember that this is not personal legal advice, it's general information. And so if you would like to make sure that you're on the right track, schedule a consultation, get representation through your process. Yesenia, have a happy Thanksgiving as well. Thanks so much. Enjoy your Thanksgiving wherever you are. If you're celebrating, have a great Thanksgiving. I hope you get to spend it in a meaningful way. And I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll be releasing videos throughout the day tomorrow, so you can look out for that. I'm going to try to keep them entertaining and informative as usual. Have a good night. Thanks so much for the love, everyone. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.